Hello and welcome to Uncle Matt's Online Academy. Today we have English language and we're going to talk about voice. In English language, most basic sentences are made up of three things. Action being performed in the sentence, the person performing the action, and the person receiving the action. That is what we call SVO. S is subject or person or thing that is performing the action in the sentence. V is the verb or the action that is being performed in the sentence. While O is the object or the person or thing receiving the action performed in the sentence. Subject, verb, object. When we are talking about voice, we are trying to stress on the person performing the action or the person receiving the action. We are laying emphasis either on the person performing the action or the person receiving the action. That is what we call voice in English language. Sometimes you want to know more about the person performing the action in a sentence. And some other times you want to know more about the person receiving the action. I slapped Chike. I slapped Chike. You may want to know who slapped Chike. In that case, the emphasis will be laid on me, I, which is the subject of the sentence. I slapped Chike. Some other times, you may not want to bother about who slapped Chike, but you want to know whether Chike was slapped. So, in that case, the sentence can be Chike was slapped. Chike was slapped. You want to be sure that it's Chike that was slapped and not another person. So trying to know or to lay emphasis on the subject or the object, or trying to know whether the stress in a sentence is on the person performing the action or the person receiving the action is what we call voice in English language. This voice in English language, we have two types of voices. We have active voice and we have passive voice. An active voice is when we are laying emphasis on the subject, that is, on the person performing the action. While passive voice is when we are laying emphasis or when we are stressing more on the person receiving the action, that is, the objects in the sentence. Types: active voice, 2, passive voice. Passive voice. Most sentences in English language are in active voice. Most sentences are expressed in active voice, but there are many other times that we may want to express some sentences in passive voice. That is in a case where we don't want to know about the subject. We express the subject in passive voice, or when we care less, we don't want to bother so much about the subject. Even if we know the subject, we are really not bothering about it. in which case we are de-emphasizing the subjects. We use passive voice. Also, in scientific reports, the emphasis is on the results, and result is always an object, is always the receiving parts of an action. And in most scientific reports, we want to know the results. We may not really want to know how the results or the method was done. We just want to know the results of the research or the tests performed. So, most scientific reports are expressed using passive voice. So, these are the cases where we can express sentences in passive voice. One, we express passive voice when we want to de-emphasize on the subjects. We also express passive voice in a case where we don't care or when we don't want to put the subjects, in a case where you want to hide the objects, you want to hide the subjects, we express it in passive voice. If in your house your elder brother did something wrong, which your parents will notice, but he has begged you, he has pleaded with you not to tell any person that is the one that did it, you can still tell people that this thing was done without putting the name of the person that did it. In that case, what you are going to use to report the case is passive voice, so that you can successfully express what has been done without mentioning the person that did that thing. That is the use of passive voice. Somebody eats your food and has pleaded with you not to tell any person that is the person that ate the food. You can tell your parents that my food was eaten. My food was eaten. In this case, you have expressed the case without putting the name or mentioning the person that ate the food, even though you may know the person that ate it, because the person had pleaded with you not to tell any person that the person that ate it. So that is one case where we use passive voice. Another case is where we want to de-emphasize, even if we know the subjects, we are not that much interested in it. That is, we are de-emphasizing it. We are laying less emphasis, less stress on it. Another case is when we want to put scientific reports, although in some reports we still express them in active voice, but in most scientific reports it is better to express them in passive voice. So, active voice. Active voice. In active voice, in active voice, in active voice, we lay emphasis on the subjects. We lay emphasis on the subjects or the person or thing performing the action in a sentence. In a sentence. Examples. Okay. On the subject. Okay. Yeah. Examples. The rat ate the fish. Now here, we are laying emphasis on the rats, the subjects. You may be trying to prove that you are not the one that ate the food, the fish, but instead the rats. That the rats ate the fish. The argument is on the rats, that it is the rat and not you that ate the fish. So here the subject is being emphasized. So it is in the active voice. Now we may also remove, if we want to change or transform this sentence to passive voice, we can remove the subjects entirely. We can put it, but try to de-emphasize it by introducing certain words that often de-emphasize a word in a sentence. We are going to talk about that later. Example 2. Example 2. Obi kicked the ball. Obi kicked the ball. Obi kicked the ball. Now here, you may also be trying to argue that you are not the one that kicked the ball, but it is Obi that kicked the ball. So the emphasis is on the subjects Obi. Obi kicked the ball. Obi is the subject, this is the verb, and this is the object. Subject, verb, object. Example 3. Example 3. She read the book. She read the book. Now, in this sentence, the subject is she, and the object is book. The verb is read. We are paying attention to the word she. She is the one that read the book and not he. He, she is not this, but this that read the book. He is not the one that read the book, she's the one that read the book. So the emphasis is on the subject and she here. This is another example of active voice. Now for passive voice. Passive voice. In a passive voice, here the emphasis is on the object or the person or thing that is receiving the action. The person or thing that is receiving the action performed, the action performed in a sentence. Examples. The fish was eaten by the rats. 2. The ball was kicked. The ball was kicked by Obi. 3. The book was read by her. The book was read by her. Here, in passive voice, we can notice one thing. To transform an active voice to a passive voice, we introduce certain words to amend the sentence from active voice to passive voice. Now the transformation is this: converting active voice to passive voice. Now what we do is this: most sentences follow SVO. Now in transforming from active voice to passive voice, we do it OVS. OVS. That is objects, then followed by verb, and then the subject. But it is not this simple. In doing that, this verb will not go alone. The verb will be associated with an auxiliary verb. We introduce an auxiliary verb to help the main verb in the sentence. So it is actually going to be the object plus auxiliary verb plus the main verb, then plus something else before we now introduce the subjects. If we want to introduce the subjects. So in this sentence, the fish was eaten by him, by the rats. Now see this verb, the verb here, once we introduce an auxiliary verb, what we always follow an auxiliary verb is a past participle. That means that the verb in the active voice we always change to past participle when we are moving it from active voice to passive voice. We first of all introduce an auxiliary verb, and once we put an auxiliary verb, what will follow it is a past participle. The auxiliary verb we are putting is the verb to be. The verb to be, we put an auxiliary verb to be and then put a past participle. An auxiliary verb to be is always followed by a past participle. So from the rat ate the fish, if we are transforming it, it becomes the rat ate the fish, active. The rat ate the fish. Now passive, if we want to transform it to passive, now it will be the object is the fish. The fish, we start with it, then plus auxiliary was, the verb is ate, we have to move it to past participle, was eating. Now we can leave the sentence like this, or we can introduce the subject if we wish to. If you want to put the subject, we have to de-emphasize it by putting the word by. the rats. The fish was eaten by the rats. We de-emphasize the subject by using the word by. The fish was eaten by the rats. We first of all start with the subjects, with the objects, then introduce an auxiliary to be, and then the main verb. The main verb will be in the past participle because it is being helped by the verb to be. And now, if we are introducing the subjects, we have to de-emphasize it by putting the word by, then before we put the subjects. Example 2. Another one. If we want to transform Obi kicked the ball, active. Obi kicked the ball. If we want to transform it to passive, it is going to be, we start with the object, the ball. This is a past tense, so we introduce an auxiliary verb. An auxiliary past was kicked. Past participle of kick is kicked. The same thing with the past tense of it was kicked. In this case, this kicked is not a past tense but a past participle. The ball was kicked. Now we can now introduce the subject by de-emphasizing it using the word by, Obi. 3. Active. The book. She read the book. She read the book. She read the book. Now passive. We start with the object, the book. The book read, past tense, so we introduce an auxiliary past, was read. This read here is a past participle and not a past tense. Was read. Then we can introduce the subjects by de-emphasizing it using the word by. By. Here, if you have a pronoun as the subject and we want to move the sentence to a passive voice, we have to transform the subject, that the pronoun, from nominative case to accusative case. So it is going to be, the book was read by her. We are going to talk about case in another class. We have nominative case, accusative case, and dative case. We are going to talk about it in the next class. So that is the voice, or what we call voice in English language, stressing on the action performer or the action receiver in a sentence. We have two types of voice, the active voice and the passive voice, and I've shown you how to recognize the active voice and how to recognize the passive voice and when each of them is used and how to transform an active voice to passive voice.